Hello and welcome to our CalStateTEACH CalTPA Cycle 2 training session. Today we will be discussing Step 3 and Step 4 from Cycle 2, and those steps are the Reflect and Apply steps for Cycle 2. Let's take a look at the overview document. As a reminder, this document piece can be found inside of the assessment guide that's housed in the TPA Center on the course website. So as I mentioned, today we are going to be focusing on Step 3, Reflect, and Step 4, Apply. And it provides a nice nutshell right here of what you will need to do during the course of Step 3 and Step 4. And then it also describes the evidence you will be submitting. So you can see that there are two pieces of evidence you'll submit for Step 3 and two pieces of assessment you will submit for Step 4. But during our time today, we're going to take a close look at everything you need to do and everything you need to submit. So let's start with Step 3. The first part of Step 3 is that you need to score the formal assessment results for the whole class using the rubric, scoring criteria, or checklist sheet that you created for Step 1, Plan, and Step 2, Teach and Assess. So this is the time where you need to now take one of those formal assessments. Of course, you're going to score the 3 formal assessments, one from every single lesson, but you only need to pick one for Step 3, okay? What is the formal assessment that you want to use? And you're going to score it using that rubric or checklist or criteria sheet. And then you are going to submit the 3 student formal assessment responses. Okay, and now your 3 students that you're using as your focus students for Step 3 in Cycle 2 are very different from the focus students that you used for Cycle 1. So please do not confuse who you needed to use for Cycle 1 with who you now need to use for Cycle 2. In Cycle 2, you will be selecting 3 work samples from students, and it will be from someone who exceeded the learning goal, so someone who's a high performer, someone who met the learning goal, so it's right there in the middle range, and someone who has not yet met the learning goal, so is maybe struggling a bit. Okay, so from the one assessment, you're going to select the 3 work samples that you are going to submit for CalTPA. You're also going to provide detailed feedback on these 3 work samples, right? The work sample from the person exceeding, the person who's meeting, and the person who's not yet meeting the learning goal. You'll provide feedback regarding what they're doing well and what they need to work on in relation to that rubric or checklist or a criteria sheet and the goals of the lesson. So what you'll do is you'll reflect on the evidence you observed of student learning and accomplishment of the student learning goals. So based on what you observed while you were implementing the lesson and while you were administering the assessment, and based on the results of the assessment, what is it you observed about student learning? Did they meet the goals? Did they not meet the goals? Okay, and you're also going to be describing what was most and least effective, as well as a target area, an area that you want to pinpoint for increasing your instructional effectiveness for the next lesson that you teach. And these types of prompts are what are going to be found inside of the analysis of assessment results and reflection for whole class and individuals template. It's a very long title for this document. And this template can be found in the TPA Center for CalTPA. Let's take a look. When we look at this document, you can see within the directions box that this document can be 5 pages in length. So you need to keep that in mind as you're completing each prompt. And you can see that there are 2 sections to this. The first section is about analyzing the formal assessment. So we have to make sure we're making the clear distinction. Previously, in Cycle 2, Step 2, we were looking at the informal assessment and the student self-assessment. Now we're looking at the formal assessment that you gave, probably at the end of a lesson. And what you need to do is pick that one assessment, and it says with respect to the learning goals, so whatever the goal was for that lesson, you're going to report on the content-specific progress of your whole class on the formal assessment. Okay, you're going to complete this table below to describe each learning goal and to provide the number or percentage of students who either exceeded, met, or have not met the learning goal. So you'll need to grade or score all of the student assessments, and you're going to put your learning goals in here. You don't have to have 3. Maybe you only have 1 learning goal. Maybe you have 2. It's okay. You're going to put the content-specific learning goals here, and those should be taken directly from the lesson plan that you wrote for step 1, okay, when you were planning. So you'll put the learning goal here, and then you're going to say in number form how many exceeded the goal, how many met the goal, and how many are not yet at the goal. And then from there, it says you're going to analyze the formal assessment results for the whole class, again, in relation to the content-specific learning goals. And here's the key part: and identify and describe emerging patterns of student errors, skills, and understandings for the whole class and for individuals. You can see here in bold, it says cite evidence from the assessment results submitted for the 3 students. So this is where you're going to take a close look, like a magnifying glass look, at the assessments your student completed to see, okay, what am I noticing? What is this cluster of students having a struggle with? What is this cluster of students doing really well? And you want to start to find the patterns of learning you're seeing. I'm just going to throw out some examples. Are your English language learners all struggling with a certain aspect? And so you know that's something that, hey, maybe I need to pinpoint some more targeted supports for my English language learners because they all seem to struggle with the same aspect. Or there's this group of learners that all really excelled at this portion, so I probably need to embed some more higher level thinking or some more extension activity to help them further their learning. So you want to find those patterns of learning based on the assessment results. And you also want to cite specific evidence from the 3 student work examples. So this is where you're going to say, here's whole class, and then you're going to break it down for each focus student. I would even do this, whole class, right? Because we need to fit in these brackets. Talk about the big picture, the whole class and the patterns that you saw. And then talk about focus student 1. What did you notice within that focus student's work example? What did you see? Was this student doing well? What did this student struggle with? And cite evidence. You can say, when you look at the work sample and reading what they wrote on line 3, they said, and quote what they said, and then provide the rationale. What does that mean? What does what they're saying and what they're doing mean to you? It means that they're meeting the goal, they're not meeting the goal, they're exceeding the goal, and how you know that, okay? And then do the same thing for focus student 2, have the same discussion, and then for focus student 3 as well. And remember, one should be exceeding, one should be meeting, and one should not yet be meeting the learning goal. So you should be able to talk very specifically about their 3 work samples and what you found. Now prompt 3 says, for those students whose achievement did not yet meet the content specific learning goals, those that are still struggling a bit on this formal assessment, what do you need to do next instructionally to meet their content learning and language development needs? So this is making you think a little bit deeper. Okay, I have this group of students. They're not yet meeting the learning goal. What do I need to do specifically for this group of learners? You're going to write this here. What are you going to do next? How are you going to prepare them to be able to move on to the next lesson if they don't yet have the content down for the current lesson? And then number 4, it says, what type of feedback will you provide to students, and how will you assist them to use this feedback to revise their work and take next steps to advance their learning? So you want to be very strategic and specific about this and say that you're giving feedback in relation to that rubric or their check sheet, and you're using the different pieces on there to help explain to students what they did well and what they need to improve upon. Okay, and how are you expecting them to use this feedback? What do you want them to do with that feedback? When are they going to use it? How are they going to use that feedback? You want to be explicit about that aspect. When and how are they going to use the feedback? And how are you going to support them with that too? What are you going to do, and what are you expecting them to do with this feedback? Now the second part is your reflection on the assessments and your next steps for learning. So where are you going now that you know this information? So number 1 says, oh, here, let's read these directions because they are actually helpful. It says, based on your summary and analysis of student learning from the informal assessment, right? So from step 2, and from your student self-assessment from step 2, and this formal assessment that you just spoke about above, and the evidence from the video clips, reflect on what you learned about student progress toward meeting the content-specific learning goals. Then respond to the following prompts. And you can see again in bold, it says, cite the video clips or the 3 assessment responses with feedback to support your written narrative. So this means you need to make sure that you are mentioning minute markers from those 4 video clips you're submitting for step 2, or you need to quote or cite evidence from the 3 student work samples from the one who's meeting, the one who's exceeding, and the one who's not yet met the learning goal, in order to explain what you're doing next. Okay, so it says, think about your teaching practice during the learning segment and how what you learned from your analysis of multiple types of assessment, right? The informal student self-assessment and the formal assessment. So after the analysis of multiple types of assessments about your students' understanding of content and academic language proficiency. So the first part of it is, what was most effective about your teaching or assessment? So you need to self-reflect. This is something we're all very good at because you have to do it very often in our program. So you know that you're very good about thinking reflectively about your teaching practice and what went well and what was effective. Okay, so what was effective in helping students achieve the content, academic, language learning goals of the segment? What did you do well that helped them? And then the next part, what was less effective? So what would you change? What would you do differently, right? That's probably a conversation you have with your faculty every time you meet with them. What went well and what would you change or do differently? So what was less effective about your teaching or the assessment? What do you want to target as an area of growth to increase your effectiveness as a teacher? Now again, it's best if you can have this tie to the content, right? So what was less effective about your instruction of the content or the strategies or the activities that you selected in teaching that content, right? Don't talk about things that were less effective as far as time management or the seating arrangement. Those are things that could happen in any lesson. You want to talk more specifically about this lesson related to literacy content, okay? And how you're thinking about how you're teaching literacy and constantly being aware of what you can change and what you can improve upon when you're teaching. So what do you want your target area for growth to be? And explain why you have chosen this target area. Now remember, when you're answering these 2 prompts, you need to cite evidence from the videos. So that's where you say, as you can see at minute marker 2 minutes and 29 seconds in clip 2, this is what I said and this is what I had students do, and it wasn't quite effective, and here's why. Okay, so you want to find that area that maybe wasn't so effective and talk about it after you cite it. Same thing when it comes to what was most effective. Find it in that clip. What was most effective in those clips, and talk about it and cite it. Okay, also talk about the student work samples, because especially your student who's exceeding, maybe you did something that you want to talk about that, or it could be with any of them actually, something that worked really well, that they did well in their assessment. Okay, and same thing, something that maybe they all struggled with, or at least 1 or 2 of them struggled with when it came to those focus students, and how you can cite it within their work sample and then explain it, right, here in this area. Here's what I see in the work sample. This is what they said, and quote it, and then follow up with a rationale here, and this is what it means, and this is why I need to improve upon this. And then here's the rubric that ties to the work that we've done up to this point for step 3. We know that a level 2 is considered passing at this time. So let's look at that area first, and then we'll look over at the level 4. So level area 2 says that your analysis of the formal assessment results is incomplete and results in a minimal or cursory description of whole class performance in relation to the learning goals. Individualized feedback is not provided. Okay, so in order to score 2, you just do a so-so write-up about what you noticed in the assessments for the whole class. Okay, you may not focus on those patterns of learning or what really was happening in that assessment. And it also says the formal assessment is used to identify deficits or lack in student learning capacity and is not educative of, let me see where it gets to the last part of it. So an example, students do not advance their knowledge by completing the assessment, right? That's the whole goal, is that we want them to complete this assessment to have an understanding of where they're at and where they need to go, okay? And no application or transfer is evidence. Students demonstrate rote knowledge or lower order thinking skills. I know we've talked about that in the previous presentations where that we've had, where we want to aim towards the higher order thinking, not the lower order, just rote memorization, rote recall. We want them thinking a little bit deeper about the content. So you want to have an assessment that does that. But hey, if your formal assessment assesses for rote knowledge and lower order thinking, still scores at a level 2 currently, okay? But we want to aim for the 4. So in order to get a 4, you need to have the level 3 pieces as well as level 4. So it says your analysis of the formal assessment results accurately describes performance for the whole class in relation to that scoring criteria or rubric or checklist. And it identifies general patterns or trends in relation to the learning goal. You can do that, right? You can identify the patterns of learning you're seeing when you look at all the different work samples, and you can talk about them in relation to that rubric that you've created, because that's how you're assessing the work samples anyway. Then it says your assessment scoring criteria rubric align with the learning goals and enable the candidate to score student work consistently. Seems to make sense. And then you also need this piece. Candidate accurately describes learning patterns or trends for individuals, citing clear evidence from the student work sample. So this is talking about those 3 focus students, that you're able to see the patterns of learning that they have as well. Who are they connected to? Who are they similar to in that group of learners that you have? And what do you see them doing? Cite evidence from their work sample. And that you identify students' partial and developing understanding of the content as well, right? So you're able to identify what they're not understanding and what they're doing well and what they're kind of getting, right? You're able to pick it all out, and that gives you that level 4. Here's the evidence that you will be submitting to the CalTPA website for step 3. You're going to submit your 3, right, the scored formal assessment for the 3 focus students, okay? That high performer, the one that's exceeding the expectation, the middle range, who's meeting the expectation, and a struggling student who is not yet meeting the expectation, right? So you're going to submit their formal assessment work sample along with the scoring criteria or rubric that you used in order to evaluate their assessment. And it should have feedback written on it. Okay, this is where you're going to put the specific feedback to the students, and you're going to mark up their score sheets so that it's very clear to the scorer what feedback you're providing to the students. And it shouldn't just be circling or starring. You need to write out sentences about what feedback you'd give to that students to tell them what they're doing well, what they're kind of getting, and what they still need to work on. And then you'll also be submitting the analysis of formal assessment results and a reflection for the whole class and individuals template that's up to 5 pages. Now we're on to step 4. This is the last step, and then you're done. When we look here, move that up there. Step 4 is the apply step. So it says, based on your analysis of all 3 types of assessment results, the informal, the self-assessment, and the formal assessment, determine if you will teach to the whole class or a group from the class, either a reteaching activity, right, because students did not demonstrate the content-specific learning goals or objectives of the lesson, or an extension activity to build on the instruction provided because students did demonstrate the content-specific learning goal. So you have to decide what direction you want to go. Do you want to do a small group reteaching activity based on the assessment results, or are you going to do an extension activity with the students who got it and are ready to move on, right? The extension activity may not be for the whole class because more than likely there's going to be a small cluster of students who didn't get it and weren't ready yet. So you still need to reteach to them before they're ready to move on. So you need to determine if you're doing the reteach or an extension activity. Once you've determined that, then you can open up the reteaching or extension activity description template. Let's take a look at it. All right, this one I do need to zoom in a little bit because it's small. Okay, when we look at this template, you can see that you're allowed to type up to 3 pages for the document. And what you're going to do here is identify, are you teaching this whole class or are you going to teach a small group from the class? Just put an X in a box. And then you need to put in your content-specific learning goal. So whether it's an extension or it's a reteach, you need to put in what your learning goal is going to be. If it's a reteach, it may be a very similar goal to the lesson that you did previously, tied to that assessment that you used previously. Then it says here for 3, you need to put in a brief description of the activities, including use of ed technology as appropriate, and how it will develop or extend students' deep understanding of content knowledge, skill, or ability, and to develop academic language. So you're going to talk about the activities you're planning on having students do during this lesson in order to help them have a better understanding of the content or to extend their knowledge of the content and to develop that academic language. And it says you should use some ed tech. So I recommend putting ed tech in there if you can. Okay, if it is evidenced at your school site, if you have access to it, then you should put it in here. And remember, the computer lab or the roving cart of iPads or Chromebooks can be accessible to you if you ask and use those for your ed tech. Now, number 4 says, what is your rationale for choosing this content-specific learning activity? Ooh, look in bold. Cite evidence from your analysis of the informal, student self, and formal assessments. So it says, in determining the need for this lesson, cite evidence from your analysis of the informal and student self-assessment. So that would have been from step 2. Or your analysis of this formal assessment that came from step 3. So you want to cite what you said in those prompts. Cite what the students did in their work samples that is helping you determine that this is what you need to do next with this group of students in order to reteach the content or extend student learning beyond the learning goal. So you're only doing one or the other. You're either reteaching or you're extending the learning. You need to decide which way you're going. So you want to be very explicit. You want to cite your references and say, this is why, this is what it is, and here's the rationale, here's why I'm doing it. And then number 5, informal assessments during activity to check for student understanding of the content and academic language development. So what are your informal assessments going to be during this lesson? They could be similar to the informal assessments you used previously. You may want to tweak them a little bit if they didn't work effectively for you. Okay, are you going, and it gives ideas here, which is so helpful. Are you going to do some questioning, observational notes? Are you going to do think, pair, shares? Are you going to have them use whiteboards? Are you going to have them do a Kahoot? What is it going to be that you're using for your informal assessment? And then you also need to talk about any instructional adaptations or accommodations to the activity to allow all students to access and engage in deep learning and demonstrate their understanding of the content and academic language. So this is where you need to think about your students in your context for learning document that you filled out. And do you have students with IEP? Do you have students with a 504 plan? Do you have English language learners? Do you have GATE students? Do you have struggling readers? Do you have struggling writers? Are they included in this group that you're teaching? If any of those people, which I'm sure there will be, are included in this group, you need to talk about how you're planning to make adaptations or accommodations or embed supports. And you can talk about each of those groups individually. Hey, my English language learner group that I'm working with here, these are the adaptations I'm planning to make just for them in order for them to have better access to the content and have a better understanding of the content during this lesson. And that is the end of that template. So previous document was to help you create a lesson plan, that you use lesson that you're going to now. So once you have it prepared, you're going to video record the entire follow-up activity. Okay. So from start to finish, just record the whole thing, because then from there you're going to select one video clip that's 5 minutes or less that demonstrates how you adjusted or built on your instruction based on your analysis of all assessment results from steps 2 and 3. So within that video clip, there needs to be evidence of how you adjusted your teaching, right? So that would be the reteach, or how you built on your instruction. That would be the extension. So it's one or the other, it doesn't need to be both. So you have to strategically plan that. How are you going to make it evident that you're either adjusting instruction or building instruction? That's where I would say put in the language of, okay, boys and girls, I know that yesterday we did X, Y, and Z, and I know we had a little trouble with X, Y, and Z. So today we are going to do A, B, and C in order to help you have a better understanding of X, Y, and Z. Something like that. That would show how you adjusted your instruction a bit, just verbally. And then you get into the activity and you show evidence of some of the activities that you're doing that shows that you're now teaching the lesson in a slightly different way than you did before in order to help them have better access to the content. Here's the rubric that aligns with step 4. Again, we're looking at level 2 because that's what's considered passing at this time. This candidate loosely applies what was learned from reviewing assessment results to plan and teach a follow-up activity. Or the analysis of assessment results is limited and does not reflect class abilities in regard to the learning goals. So that tells me that either you don't fully think through what you're going to teach and you just say, hey, I'm going to teach what's next. Right? It doesn't fully connect to what students need based on those assessment results. Or you're not providing the best analysis of the assessments in order to have an understanding of why you need to go on to this next lesson. And it says that your rationale for activity choice is unclear. That's more vague. Okay? And evidence citations do not align with why the activity was planned and taught. If we land here, it's still considered passing and is still that level 2. But of course, we want to aim to the level 4. In order to get at level 4, it says that you apply what was learned from an analysis of assessment results to plan and teach a content-specific follow-up activity. So what you're planning to teach truly connects to what you previously taught. And if you're reteaching, the candidate provides instruction in a new way to support students to meet their learning goals. That's what I just discussed on the previous page, was that you're teaching this content in a new way so that students have better access to the content. And if providing extension activity, the activity deepens and advances the student's learning, so it takes them deeper than the initial activity did. And it says that you provide a rationale for activity based on analysis of student performance during the learning segment, and you cite evidence from the assessment results that support your choice of follow-up activity. So this tells me that your rationale for why you chose this activity is clearly connected to the assessment results, and you provide an explicit, clear rationale as to why you're doing this activity based on what the assessment results showed. And that you also provide specific adaptations or accommodations for individuals to increase access and meaningful engagement. Of course you're going to do that because we want to meet the individual needs of all the learners in our class. For step 4, here is the evidence you will need to submit to the CalTPA website. First, you will submit the reteaching or extension activity description template that's up to 3 pages. You will also submit the annotated video clip of the reteaching or extension activity. Now, the annotated clip that you create, the annotation should be titled follow-up, as it says here. And within that annotation, as I stated previously, you need to be explaining where and how you either retaught the content in a new, different way if you're doing a reteaching activity, or you need to be referencing where and how you extended student learning beyond the learning goals of the segment if you're doing the extension activity. So you should have at least one annotation in there. Remember how I said maybe you'd be using your language to say we did this yesterday and so we're doing this today, and that could be one example of how you're reteaching the information. You're giving the scorer a heads up to that and you want to annotate that, but then you also need to have some specific annotations related specifically to showing evidence of how you retaught that content or how you extended student learning through the activities that you did. And as I mentioned previously, that annotated video can be up to 5 minutes, but does not need to be that long. It just needs to be long enough in order to show evidence of where and how you either retaught or extended the lesson. And before you submit your Step 3 and Step 4 documents to the CalTPA website, you need to be sure to share all of your documents and videos and the annotations. Remember, just like when you did Cycle 1, your annotations for Cycle 2 will be done on the Pearson website using the annotation system on the Pearson platform. Okay, so in order to receive feedback on that annotation or the multiple annotations that you're making for this video clip, you need to put them into either a Word or a PDF document, and they'll give you the feedback on that. And then you will be able to take that one clip, put it in the TPA Center, or I'm sorry, put it in on CalTPA's website, and then you'll be able to use the Pearson annotation tool to add the annotations that way. But having them saved as a Word or PDF also provides you with a backup, because once you put them in that annotation tool and you submit, you will no longer have access to the annotations or any of the work that you submit for CalTPA. So you'll always want a backup copy. So please share all of your Step 3 and 4 pieces with your collaborative group so that you can get that effective feedback, and then you will be ready to submit on the CalTPA website. And that's the end of our Step 3 and Step 4 training. I hope you have a great day.